Alright, guys, so I'm going to talk about Identity Disc, or Sinister 6 Identity Disc, as some people call it. This is a comic that didn't come from Chris, this is one I got, and this is a comic I've always wanted to read, because it just sounded like, the premise alone, I was like, okay, I'll give it a shot. This might be a fun, underrated story, or it might be completely mediocre at best. Can you guess it was the latter and not the former? Well, it was mediocre. It was just mediocre. So let's get into Identity Disc. So what is Identity Disc? Well, Identity Disc is basically a miniseries that brought together Vulture, Sandman, Deadpool, Bullseye, Juggernaut, and Sabretooth under this woman named Valeria. And basically she works for a person known only as Mr. Silver. She claims to work for him and basically says, here's the deal. AIM has gotten possession of a disc that holds all the information of every identity of the superhero community. Like, every superhero in the world, their identity, everything down from their family members to their social security number is all on this disc. And and Mr. Silver wants you to go get this disc. So yeah, they're like, all right, fuck it, fine, we'll go do that. We can do that. Except Sandman, who quote unquote dies. We'll get to that in a moment, because I'm gonna spoil this book a bit. I just thought, like, this is a comic that like, sometimes I just like to talk about obscure books and be like, yeah, that happened. Kind of like when I vaguely remember doing a review of the Punisher Sabretooth Spider-Man comic. And I know no one cared, but I was like, you know what? Sometimes I just want to do an obscure book. Like, sometimes you just got to bring the obscure comics to light. That's really sometimes all you got to do. So in this story, it's really not so much Sinister 6, it's more like Fearsome 5. Because, yeah, Sandman, quote-unquote, dies at the beginning, so now it's just Vulture and the others. The positives I do like is that I do like the combination of villains. Deadpool wasn't as big at the time. This was at the point where the Cable and Deadpool comic was going on. You also had Bullseye, who hadn't been doing much. The major Daredevil runs hadn't started. Juggernaut was kind of on the X-Men. He had this stupid black armor I don't like. And Sabretooth was around. So, and Vulture was people were making fun of Vulture at this point. Vulture and Sandman were like, yeah, they're Spider-Man villains, but who gives a fuck about them? And being someone who likes both Sandman and Vulture, whenever I do like a top 10 Spider-Man, whenever I think of top 10 Spider-Man villains, Vulture and Sandman are both on that list. And Vulture does play a big part in this comic. He really does play a large role in the book. Because what he gets is his daughter. Like, that's the thing, is that he gets his daughter. We don't know we kind of know that, like, Sandman, his mother gets threatened. Deadpool is promised to help him find his ex-wife. Bullseye is offered protection from 2 mobs he screwed over. Juggernaut is protected from having information of being accused of a murder he didn't commit, and we don't know about Sabretooth, though. So yeah, the whole story is just the team trying to pull... Like, I'm convinced the writer of this book, Rob Rhodey, clearly read Ocean's 11 and was like, I want to do this, but with, like, an obscure... Like, instead of, like, 11... Like Ocean's 11 and do, like, 11 different supervillains, I'm gonna just do 5. I'm gonna half that number, and then do, like, a very half-assed heist thing, and then I'm gonna finish with Usual Suspects as the final issue. Because literally, the 5th and final issue of this comic is fucking Usual Suspects. It's straight up the Usual Suspects. It takes so many pieces of that plot. It takes so many, like, bits and pieces from that story. Yeah. The action's in here decent, but, like, everyone acts so out of character. Deadpool isn't that funny. He's more annoying than anything else. There's no, like, good writing for him. There's no good writing for any of these characters. Like, no one really feels like like the characters you know. Like, Sabretooth doesn't feel like Sabretooth. Juggernaut doesn't feel like Juggernaut. None of these characters are written in a way where it's like, yeah, that's how that character would sound. We do find out, like, some other things that, like, we all kind of figured out from the beginning because, basically, throughout the comic, there's narration between two people. I'm like, oh, it's Nick Fury and one of the inmates. Sure enough, it is Nick Fury, and I was like, by like the second issue, I was like, oh, he's talking to Vulture. Yeah, he's talking to Vulture. And it turns out that his daughter was actually Valeria, and she was a S.H.I.E.L.D. agent working on the inside to help her father. So, yeah. Which doesn't make any sense because then we go to the Spider-Man Marvel Knights book, and we find out that they just got rid of this character and just brought in another person who's Vulture's daughter, who's black, and also the mother of Starling, a character in the Miles Morales book. So this comic really doesn't, like, no one bothered, like, clearly no one in Marvel read this book. Like, it's become very obvious that no one read this fucking book. Anyway, yeah. It's oh yeah, Sandman survived. Like, they do this hand wavy thing because it's clear, like, no, like, I think even Rob Rhodey was like, no one's gonna read this book. Like, everyone lived, it's fine. I know it looks like some of them died, they're totally fine. Everyone's alive. We're all fine here. We're fine. We're all fine here. How are you? Yeah. This book's all right, and it's weird because I wanted to like this book because I've been looking for it all over the place, and I found it at a comic shop just on a whim. Like, I looked up and I was like, oh, look at that, I guess I'll buy that. And sure enough, I bought it. If you can find it, that it's out of print for the most part, but yeah, also the artwork's not great. I forgot to mention, because this comic is so mediocre, I've literally forgotten chunks of it. Anyway, so there you go, guys. That is pretty much Sinister 6, the Identity Disc. I also am convinced that this book probably came out in response, because this came out roughly the same time as Identity Crisis was going on. So, yeah, Identity Disc, Identity Crisis. Methinks Marvel wanted to have, like, some bit of the identity pie. That sounded dirty. Anyway, so other than that, hope you all enjoyed this review. I'm Mr. Multiverse. I'll see you next time in the Multiverse.